Bonjour. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this conference on European space defense. And it is co-organized by two think tanks, SYNOPIA and Conférence Europe, two French think tanks. So before I leave the floor to our panelists, I'd like to introduce this conference with a few words. Space, as you know, has an undeniable strategic dimension, and our societies have developed a dependence on space capabilities, which is increasing year after year. Furthermore, scientific development has facilitated access to space, not only for the main space powers, but also for newcomers, mainly known as the new space. Therefore, today space has become the scene of new economic competition and potentially geopolitical conflicts. In this context, the question is, what can be the place of Europe in the international competition relating to the space domain? As you know, Europe has developed a space industry that occupies important positions on the launcher market, thanks to the Ariane and Vega programs, as well as on the satellite market. Through its space policy, the EU has developed reference programs at world level, such as Galileo, the first satellite navigation and positioning infrastructure designed for civilian use. Also Copernicus, which provides autonomous access to satellite services. And another service that is EGNOS, European Geostationary Navigation Overlay Service, which is a European complementary service for navigation by geostationary satellites. Space technology, data, and services therefore make an essential contribution to the daily lives of Europeans and to the economic activity of the Union. And thanks to the information they provide, they also contribute to safeguarding the strategic interests of the EU and its member states. But space remains more than ever a gigantic challenge for all European actors, private and public. And this conference is about understanding the key challenges that Europe must take up. So I planned on asking my first question to the General Michel Friedling, but he's going to be a little late, so we're going to wait for him. And first I will address to Patrick Chattard-Moulin, your Deputy Head of the Space Division at the European External Action Service. Your areas of responsibility include the space security and defense dimension of the EU, as well as multilateral and international aspects of the European space policy. So I have one main question for you. How can we create a common strategic culture in Europe on space defense?
Thank you very much. Just maybe a word to explain who we are. In fact, the External Action Service is serving the High Representative, Vice President of the Commission in charge of External Action. So it's a bit mixed between the Ministry of Defense and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Union. And the simple fact that I speak about space is a change as such, because traditionally space is managed by our colleagues of the Commission, but we do have more and more have stakes in the both international and defense aspects of space. So there is a cultural revolution ongoing with our perception of space in Europe, because traditionally space has always been managed at European level through the peaceful uses out of space. First through a cooperation with a scientific cooperation, then through economic cooperation and industry cooperation, mainly done by European Space Agency. And then later on we had these space programs that are now becoming key infrastructure of the Union. And they are symbolic also because they are part of the very few infrastructure that the EU is really owning. So the satellites of the Galileo program or of the Sentinel satellite of Copernicus are directly managed by the European Commission and by the European Union. So space space and defense, it's a cultural revolution in the sense that we now consider that space is also becoming a domain of CFSP, CSDP. A domain, it could become a domain of conflictuality. Just to be clear, it is not the will of the European Union. We are very much supporting an approach of peaceful uses out of space and non-weaponization of space. But at the same time, we cannot be naive, and we know that a lot of members of third countries are developing doctrines what we call kernel space, where basically you use any mean at your disposal to deny adversary use of space infrastructure. And here also, as part of the strategic culture, we need to be very clear that it is not because you are not serving any defense or security purpose that your infrastructure is not vulnerable to attacks. And we see it very clearly with the Ukraine invasion, where some infrastructure have been targeted, and the consequences are not on the Ukraine territory. For instance, one satellite network has been attacked, and a network of wind turbines in Germany went down because it was relying on this very network to operate. So the EU has recently adopted the strategic compass, which is a political strategy for in the area of CFSP, CSDP, and space has been identified as one of the domains to look into, along with other transversal domains like hybrid, like cyber. And we are in the process of drafting a space strategy for security and defense, which we will prepare together with our colleagues of the Commission. And we are just in the middle of this reflection. So thank you very much for this timely discussion, because it's very much what we are after. We are very much in a brainstorming mode. And talking about this strategy, basically, we are considering four different aspects. The first one is space as a domain of CFSP, and what does it take to respond to an attack in the space domain. If one of our infrastructure is attacked, we will not limit the answer to a technical one. We are of the opinion that the EU should use all the instruments at its disposal, and we have many tools, sanctions, we can make diplomatic statements, we can make sanctions. We also have a tool which is called Article 42.7, which is the equivalent of Article 5 of NATO, mutual assistance clause between member states. So we need to reflect what type of tool we want. We need also to know what is happening up there. We have, for the moment, our intelligence services in the EU. We have a single intelligence analysis cell with all the intelligence services of our member states. And the good news is that space is becoming utopic as such. They are looking into it, but we need much more. We need to know exactly what is happening in space and what is behind. Because attacking a space infrastructure is not only attacking the satellites, but any aspect of the segments, cyber, radio frequency links, ground infrastructure, and you really have to think like your opponent. He will not look at the most complicated way. He will look at the simplest way to deny access to the services. So this is really something we look into. And we have the problem of attribution, which is political. We need to, when we put our fingers at someone and saying you are aggressing us, you need to be pretty sure. And it's a decision that needs to be made collectively by 27 member states. So we need to work on it. We also need to work, and we do it together with our Commission colleagues, to improve the resilience of the infrastructure and to really be aware of our level of vulnerability. We should not detect afterwards that an infrastructure went down because we do not have the space services anymore. We should know it in advance. So this is also part of what we want to achieve. We want also to look into the partnership and multilateral aspects. We'll keep on fighting to get norms of responsible behaviors in outer space being adopted. And we have very intense activities, both on the front of the safety with Vienna, with the Committee of Peaceful Uses of Outer Space, but we also have a very active endeavor through the open-ended working group under the Disarmament Conference in Geneva. And we really would like to promote norms and the rules of responsible behavior in outer space. And throughout our future strategy, we want to impose these norms and rules of responsible behavior to ourselves. Let me give an example. On-orbit servicing, it's a nice word, but that's how third countries call some unfriendly rendezvous operation with our satellites. So we need to ourselves define our own rules and promote them worldwide. So this is in a nutshell what we want to achieve with this strategy, and I'm very much open to questions that are feeding the reflection in that matter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So the General has not arrived yet, so I will ask my question to Alain Alexis. Alain Alexis, you're an advisor for synergies between space and defense industries in the European Commission. You worked on the preparation and adoption of the European Defense Action Plan, the Defense Development Programme for 2019-2020, and the European Defense Fund. What are, according to you, the major actions carried out by the European Union in the field of space?
Thank you very much for invitation to take part to this conference today. I think it's a good timing. As Patrick just said, well, space is a new domain for defense. When we launched all the initiative in defense 5 years ago, it's not so long, huh? 5 years ago, we said what we should cover all capabilities, including space. By saying this, we have been criticized. We have been criticized because people say, well, space, what are you doing in space? There is nothing to do in space, it's civil. You have already important program like Galileo, it's enough. Why do we want to put money on defense in space? And progressively, of course, people understood that maybe should not be naive. Everything is capability. Of course, space is capability, but very recently people also understood that maybe energy can be important in case of war, water can be important, so space should be part of a strategy. We have a civil program, we will continue to support a civil program, Galileo, Copernicus. For Copernicus, what we have in mind is probably a small evolution on Copernicus, because for the time being, Copernicus is pure civil. But Copernicus is a very important instrument, and what we have in mind is to develop part of Copernicus, including for security and defense. It's a new step, but we will build on this because I think we need this. We need this defense aspect in Copernicus. So we will develop capability, but in the meantime, we need to look to the next 20 years. Where do we want to go in the next 20 years? And to do this, of course, there is only one option, which is research. We need to put money on research and development, including in space. This is part of European Defense Fund. As you know, we have more or less 1 billion every year on research and development. A few days ago, we just launched a call for 22, only for space. We will give 150 million euro. Only for 2022. And on the top of that, we have a budget for cyber, for instance, with direct impact on space. And we have a budget on disruptive technology, because here again, we need to put money on disruptive technology. One last important aspect for space is a new initiative regarding secure connectivity. As you know, it's a new program launched by Commissioner Breton. What we want to do is a new system of secure connectivity, which will cover both civil and defense. We are discussing a draft regulation in the Council and the European Parliament, so things are moving quickly, and we can probably expect launching the service already in 1 year. This is where we are in a few words.
Thank you very much. I'm sure you will have lots of questions on special programs. General Michel Friedling has joined us. Thank you very much. General. So in September 2018, you were appointed commander of the Joint Space Commandment, and you participated in the work of the Space Review, which led to the French Defense Space Strategy, published in July 2019. And in September 2019, you took the head of the Space Commandment. So as Space Commander, could you explain to us what are the major issues, the major threats, and the main players in the European space defense today and for the future? Briefly.
Briefly, I'm sorry for being late. I apologize. So I had to rush, so I'm a little bit sweating. Sorry. Thank you. Your question is wide, and it would in 1 hour to try to answer the question. But what I would like to do is just to remind some basics, that I like to say every time, because I think this is absolutely necessary to put this on the table, to set the stage, I would say, and because this is something we stated in the space defense strategy in 2018 to 19, and And this is something that today everybody is now, I would say, understanding, and this is leading to some very important changes in Europe. First, space is very important to our way of life, our economy, and this is growing every day in every single activity of human activity. You should know now that more than 10% of the GDP of the Union depends on space services. It's more than 1,000 billion euros, and more than 1 million jobs depend on the GNSS, so GPS and Galileo signals. Second point, space is very important for our defense and security, and this is growing every day. We used to use space services for intelligence, communication, and we use now space for targeting, for geography, for I would say for everything, for military operations, for autonomic strategy economy. So, and this is growing even more every day because all the future combat systems like FCAS or the equivalent in the Navy, in the Army, will be overall systems connected and by space, and the cloud combats will be allowed by space. And this is very essential for us because without space, our ground forces, armies, air forces, and maritime forces will be out of capability, definitely. So this is very crucial, and I think this is something very important because we are entering a new age in space. Regarding a number of new players, most of them being private players, private actors, and this is a huge disruption that we are facing since the last 10 years. You all know the main actors that we have since the end of the 2000s. Sorry. A lot of these players are, very present on orbit. A lot of satellites now, more and more satellites, so this is very congested. And we are facing a huge amount of risks because of debris. You know that we have 36,000 debris of more than 10 centimeters and more than 1 million debris of more than 1 centimeters. This is huge, and this is a very big problem for the future. This is one of the challenge. The other one is the threats that we are facing today in space, from cyber to direct ascent anti-satellite missiles that everybody knows, and including orbital threats. And we saw these threats appearing 10 years ago, and the number of very worrying real-world events that we are facing is increasing. I wouldn't say every day, but every month and every year. So these are the main challenges. So how do we respond to this? In France, you said that we released this strategy 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago. So I would say that we have taken the lead, I would say. This is not being arrogant, if I say that, but this is a reality. We have a very comprehensive and ambitious strategy. We have created this Space Command. We have a new doctrine. We have a new capability roadmap. We are trying to expand and to improve our international collaboration with partners, including bilateral and multilateral framework, because one of the goals of this is to make sure that everybody has the same understanding of the threats and challenges in space, and because the answer to these threats and challenges cannot be done by one single country. It has to be done in a collective approach. So you know that President Macron is very much concerned about space, This is one of the main priority of the French presidency of the EU for the first semester. And you know that the summit, space summit in Toulouse was about space in February, and he made very strong statements about the importance of space and how we should face all these challenges together. I suggest you read the statement of the president. And you know also that the strategic compass is stressing very much the importance of space, and we are on the way of having a strategic a European space defense strategy, and this is a very important step. This is very ambitious, and we are on the way to do this. I would end my first statement by saying that there are other actors in Europe. So we paved the way, I would say, in a sense, 3 years ago, but now we have in the UK, which is not in the EU anymore, but it's a European country, they have a UK Space Command. The Italian, they have a Italian Space Operation Command. And the German, they have also a German Space Operation Command. So this is the beginning of something. We have to go much farther, but I think the momentum is here, and the political will is strong, and we have to follow this.
Thank you, General. Nathalie Erard, you're head of Europe and NATO affairs for Airbus. So as the only industrial representative today, I have a specific question. What are the expectations and needs of the industry to develop new technologies related to military space?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for the invitation. So before I answer your question directly, I will recall a few elements which I think are important for the European industry. As you know, Airbus is a big player in defense with around 10 billion euro of defense revenues, and we've been active in a key space defense program, of course mainly at national level because they were in the hands of MOD, like Helios, Syracuse, Skynet, but we are involved as well in EU programs like Copernicus and Galileo. The first statement I would make is that obviously the European industry is critical for the strategic autonomy that you were mentioning, because to be able to decide freely and act freely, you need to master the key technologies and the equipment. The good news is that the required technologies and resources are available in Europe, because we've been working the European industry has been working on several programs over the last decades, and the military programs have always benefited from synergies with civil ones. You know the links between launchers and the deterrence force. The satellite imagery was useful for intelligence, and of course space telecommunication can serve both civil, commercial and secure communication. And now our engineers are working on space surveillance to deal with this critical topic of debris and avoidance of collisions on orbit. Part of these capabilities, by the way, are purely defense, like tracking radars or hardened satellites. But the European industry is able to take up the challenge, so that's the good news. The second element, in my opinion, which is positive, is that now we have, at EU level, all the elements which are put in place to move forward and take strategic decisions and significant investments. First, and you recall them, we have policies. We have the space strategy at a European level. We have as well more and more recognition and understanding of what dualities, synergies between civil and defense mean. That was a concept which was completely unknown a few years ago, so I think we made a lot of progress on that topic, and that's very important for space. And last but not least, we have the strategic compass with a comprehensive view, including some comments on the space topic. Second aspect, which is critical, we are able to master programs, and you say it. Those are the only EU-owned programs. They are in space. So in a sense, space can show the way of how to invest and manage programs. It's not always easy. That's sometimes cumbersome, but at least we went through that, and we made some significant progress on the learning curve. So we had Galileo, Copernicus. With Galileo, you even tested the public restricted service, so getting into governmental restricted access. And last but not least, we are making progress on the defense strategy at the EU level, with all components now in mind: defense research, defense development, with the European Defense Fund, and hopefully very soon some procurement initiative on the defense level. So the different bricks of EU levels are available for space and to make significant progress on space defense program. So to finalize, and my third point is the answer of your question, is what do we need? Well, we need a quicker decision process and significant investment. That's very important, because if Europe wants to play a role on the worldwide stage, if it wants to compete with huge investment from China, from the US in space technologies and space program, it has the right strategy, the right words, it has the tools, it has the skills of its engineers, and therefore it is ready to go, but it needs to act a bit more quickly and in a decisive way. And that's valid, of course, for investment in defense and security, but not only. We can see very huge investment or even contracts from the government. For example, the NRO placed a very significant order in satellite imagery, $5.5 trillion over 10 years. So that's huge, and that creates a significant distortion of competitiveness, of course, for the European industry. Those elements need to be taken into account so that Europe is more nimble and is, has a sense of ambition, and translate this ambition from a geopolitical level to significant investment in programs. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I take questions from the public, I would have one question for all of you, but maybe more for the general right now, is, in your opinion, has the war in Ukraine impacted the French space defense strategy and or the European space defense strategy?
It's a good question. I don't think so. I think what we've seen over the last 3 years is just a confirmation of what we stated in the space defense strategy. I would say the Russian-Ukraine war is very interesting because it has confirmed that space is the critical enabler for any operations on ground, in the air, or at sea. I think we have to consider the strategic messaging sent by the Russians in November 2021, just a few weeks before the beginning of the operations in Ukraine. You remember the 21st of November, they successfully tested a direct ascent missile against a satellite. And this strategic messaging is, we are ready to deny use of space capabilities to other players, even if it creates some debris, and even if it denies to us, to ourselves, the use of space capabilities. It means that they consider that the difference, the dissymmetry between the space capability for the US and their allies is so great that they are ready to lose their space capability to deny this advantage. What Ukraine has shown as well is that things will begin in the cyber and the space domain before beginning on the ground or at sea or in the air. You know that the cyber attack against Viasat was done the day before the beginning of the ground operations. So this is very, very significant, and this is very interesting. This is a big lesson, I would say. Something we were thinking, but now it's real. The other thing is of this Ukraine war is the importance of the private sector. We have seen, you all have seen the Maxar images on the screens. Maxar is a private player. Airbus do the same. It's not a big deal, but they were on the screens every single day, and they were providing, as well as Elon Musk with Starlink terminals, they were providing military capability to the Ukrainians during the war. Should they be considered as operational actors? This is a big question for the future, and I think SATCOMs, my last point, SATCOMs are crucial. We all know the thing I mentioned, the Starlink thing, but regarding not only the military operations but the information warfare, if the guys in Mariupol in the these plants succeeded in sending messages to the world and winning in a way this information warfare, it's thanks to the satellites, thanks to the space capability. So all these things led to the confirmation of the importance of space, not only for supporting the ground forces, but for information warfare and the importance of the private sector.
Thank you very much. Patrick Chattermoulin, you would like to complete?
Thank you. No, just to confirm what General said, it's clearly it has not changed the face of the war, but it's clearly a wake-up call. We did organize a briefing as part of the strategy, but also as part of the threat response, because we have a threat response architecture for our space infrastructure. One of the lessons learned is clearly the problem of supply. I mean, the dependency on the Russian launchers in particular is posing problems to the EU, to the launch of the future Sentinels, to the evolution of Galileo, and we need to find a fix. So if anything, and it's not only the Russian supply, but it's also some factories in Ukraine, and so we are very much in that situation. And I totally concur to what General has said. It has also demonstrated that yes, there was the asset, but we should not look only at the asset, because clearly if you want to target the space infrastructure, you have many ways, and the Viasat was clearly not looking at an asset, but it has led to a very persistent damage and very tailored on space infrastructures, and as I said, way behind the only Ukraine area. So we need to have a holistic view when we look at space. And to come back to what you said, the holistic view is really also about the industries, about hostile takeovers, about the resilience of the industry, not only the resilience of the asset, but the resilience of the sector facing an attack, which could be a long-term attack and could also take the form of economic aspects.
Thank you. I have a question for Mr. Alexis. Mrs. Erard talked about ambitious Europe on space defense, on space industries, to be able to compete with other leaders in this area, like China or the United States. Is it a vision that the EU is carrying, this ambitious vision, and is it shared by the 27 member states?
The approach is definitely shared by the Commission, which is what we propose. And at the end of the day, when we are confronted with such a problem, we have only one solution: we put money on the table or not, because you can always prepare nice communication. As a typically Eurocrat, I can prepare a nice communication during a weekend, but you do not solve problem with communication. It's sometimes necessary, but if you want to make progress, you need to find a budget and to develop capability. This is what we have done. We have mobilized 8 billion euros, so probably it's not enough, but it's a starting point. The second element, if you want to make progress, we need to push for cooperation. This is the objective of the Commission, saying that we are not there to substitute to member states, but we are there to push for cooperation, because the key is the cooperation. On the 27 member states, well, I would say the situation is not so bad. No? And here, probably, we should say thank you, Mr. Putin. Because when you see the evolution over the last 3 months, well, it's fantastic. 2 weeks after the invasion of Ukraine, the EU has decided to mobilize money to provide capability to a third country. That's revolution. Revolution. And the second revolution, a few weeks ago, probably you have noticed we have adopted a new communication, and in this communication there is something important. We say that the EU can use the EU budget to procure capability. Here again, it's a revolution. No? Over the last 40 years, official line of the Commission, we cannot use the EU budget to buy capability. We can use EU budget to support research, to support development, but not to procure capability. It has changed. It has changed. And we clearly say we can use the EU budget, which is, again, a huge revolution. No? It was very difficult. No? I will not explain how we get it, but it was very difficult, but it's there. So we need to continue, and I think, again, we need to mobilize the budget.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions here? Okay. Mr. Jean-Louis Gergorin, maybe present yourself very briefly. Thank you.
Jean-Louis Gergorin, I am a former head of strategy of EADS, now Airbus, and I am now a consultant focusing on aerospace, defense and cyber. And I am teaching at Sciences Po a course on the new strategic upheaval. I just want to ask a question to all the participants, obviously first to General Friedling, about a very specific challenge happening in both cyber and in space, which is the attacks that are below the threshold of open warfare as we, NATO and the various countries define it. And in cyber, we have had a lot of difficulties, all the Western countries, to deal with this challenge. Finally, in cyber, the Americans changed their doctrine, and now they are retaliating against attacks below the threshold of open warfare, like ransomware attacks, in order to deter, to both stop these attacks and to deter further attacks. The question, General, is on the issue of similar attacks in space. If there are attacks that are denying, let's say, the network, like, let's say, Eutelsat or the Astra network, if it is there is a denial of service provoked by a state, how should we respond? In cyber, the European Commission has tried something that with due respect to the EU and the European Commission, is not very effective. It's name and shame. Name and shame, and put the names of the identified officers responsible for some cyber attacks in a list of people who are forbidden to penetrate the European soil and have their hypothetical accounts in European banks frozen. With due respect to the Commission, I don't think it's a very strong deterrent. So the question, what can we do? Should the General and representatives of the European Commission, should the same kind of threats as in cyber happen in space?
I'm afraid I'm going to disappoint you. I don't have the answer right now. I can tell you what we are doing. First, the question is this attack, is it a cyber attack? Or is it, well, it is. The weapon is a cyber weapon used against space capabilities. So is the answer can be either political, economical. It hasn't to be a space response. You see what I mean? So we are at the beginning of something new, even though we are thinking about this. We have been thinking about this for the last 3.5 years, and not only us, France. We talk about these kind of things with our partners and allies on a bilateral basis and in a multilateral framework, which is called the CSPO, Combined Space Operations, with the US, Australia, Canada, UK, New Zealand, Germany, and France. And we have this kind of talks about legal and policy, trying to define what are how we can define hostile intent, hostile act in space, and what would be the rules of engagements and what kind of response we could have. This is not very easy, actually, to be honest. So you know probably that we are also working, holding hands with these countries and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in France to support the work being done under the lead of the UN about norms of the definition of norms of responsible behaviors in space. So we co-wrote a UK resolution, and this resolution was voted by the UN and led to the creation of an open-ended working group. And this open-ended working group started its work in April. It should lead to a definition of norms of responsible behaviors. This is a starting point to help defining what could be the answer to what kind of actions or behaviors in space. Just to end one point, you know that our Chief of Defense, Chief of Joint Staff, General Burkhardt, like to say, and this is in his strategy, that peace, crisis, war is not anymore the way we decrypt the conflictuality today. It's much more competition, contestation, and confrontation. And I like to say that space is gray. My counterpart, General Raymond in the US, says space is hard. I'm saying space is gray. And space is really a gray zone because you don't see exactly what's going on in space. Because duality of the sector and the players. Because you have no territoriality, no borders in space. Because the liberal framework is, the space law is very liberal. And because of this, you have this kind of hybrid strategies developing, this kind of harassment strategies, concealment strategies, binding normative strategies being developed, and all of these we have to face them and to counter them, and we don't have exactly all the answers right now.
Maybe to rebound on what the General says, on the reflection we have on the space strategy, it's a central element. In fact, when you say that we only put the name on the list, no, I think we have much more tools in the EU to react, and much more gradual than that. We can go up to sanction. We have export control regimes that we can coordinate. We can even do actions in our own project by excluding some partners. So there are many things we can do. The problem we face is the attribution, because to decide, and then I was confronted to the problem. I was in the US when there was the Viasat incident, and they had every element, the FBI and the Department of Homeland Security, but didn't want to attribute, because attribution is a political decision. And the difficulty we'll face is when we'll decide to attribute, we need to do it 27. And it's not because one member state knows. If he doesn't share the information, he will not convince the other. So one of the key elements of that, and it's very much inspired by the discussion in cyber, except what hopefully we don't have the problem of cyber criminality in space yet, is exactly this idea of having a toolbox and having a mechanism by which we can decide at 27 to activate the union tools or the tools of the member states or the Article 42.7 to react to a crisis in space. And with all the various levels of thresholds that corresponds to the intensity of the attack. Knowing also that in space we have the problem of safety, that the space debris can be generated by anybody, and we really need to make a difference, just like the UN does, between what is happening on the Committee of Peaceful Use of Space on the non-intentional things and the part that is intentional, which is very difficult to to find, because sometimes you think it's just a debris and in fact it's something else. So we have this element of complexity on top.
Thank you very much. Mr. Alexis, would you like to say something else on this topic?
No, just to learn first. I fully understand that name and blame is limited, but it's a first step. If you can imagine 5 years ago, naming, blaming, never. 5 years ago, when there was such a problem, we didn't want to know, and so it's a step. But I should recognize it's not enough. But I think probably we need more time. The second element, it's linked also to, particularly in the domain of cyber, the question of when we develop new capability, just to respond or to attack. Problem is not simple. But, and I don't know if there is a formal position of a commission on this, so I can just give you my personal opinion. It doesn't commit the commission. Personally, I don't understand the difference between defense and attack. When we have capability, well, what does it mean defense? What does it mean attack? I don't know the difference. So I think we should provide, and this is probably a role for the Commission, to provide capability to member states to decide what they have to do. And probably for the next few years, typically something for which I think member states are more competent than the Commission.
Thank you. Is there another question? I think you raised your hand first earlier. Yeah. Can you present yourself? And we'll take a few questions in a row.
Hi everybody. My name is Cecilia Pechmez and I'm a French lawyer. So my question is inevitably about law. I was thinking that countries like Russia, China have drafted their treaty that they have been trying to push to no avail. The US have also banned recently ASAT tests. So I was just wondering, is France going to assert also its role on the international law aspect? Is it also something that the EAS is aiming at? And are we going to be content with just norms of responsible behavior, or are we going to push further, like for instance is the case in the cyber, where we see more and more states publishing their policies and what they consider, how they consider international law applies to the cyber. So I really would like to take this opportunity to have you all here to have your take on this. Thank you.
Thank you. Another question? Mister, you raised your hand.
I am Steve Trumbull. I'm a journalist with Aviation Week and Space Technology. I was asking about capabilities. You've talked about intelligence, communications, targeting. There's also early warning and interception. And I see that PESCO, the project, has Twister funded, which just talked about an interceptor, as well as early warning and tracking. And I'd like to know more about what is necessary in early warning and tracking for that intercept capability. Do you need the exquisite SBIRS type capability in geospatial orbit, or something more distributed like the proliferated LEO concepts that Space Force and Space Development Agency is pursuing at the moment? Just what would that look like if there's more information on it? Thanks.
Thank you. One last question. I saw you first, but maybe if it's a very short question, you can ask it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Raul Gonzalez. I am researcher for Capgemini Space, and I worked previously in the team of Patrick, actually, in the Space Task Force. My question would be a little bit for all of you, I think, more or less. Now that we have the Asterix 1 that has gone, the exercise, and the Asterix 2, led by France, and there have been some observers, some countries already in the Asterix 2, do you think it could be possible to align a little bit of a common space doctrine for defense at the European level, starting just, if possible, with an smaller number of countries with space capabilities, such as the one that have already created documentation around it, and move from there at the European level.
Thank you. Last question, ma'am.
Thank you. I'm from Korea, so my name is Young Park, and I'm a researcher and a professor and used to government officer. So, and now I'm the CEO and the president of a Korean think tank in the private based. Anyway, to make a long question, 4 or 5, and the 2 short, the 2. And one is that I would like to ask and commander in space, Mr. General. So, and still in Korea, we have not yet established in the Space Command. So we are preparing in some way. So in the superficially, so you already said, and some Army and Navy and Air Force, and very harmonized and with the space and the Zero Space Command. But in Korea, I'm not sure. So they really harmonize, and that's because a little bit contradiction or some tension between Air Force and the Army, because in the space, which military service and sovereign or authorized some power in some way. So is there any and some and tension in between the military services? So I would like to get your more honest answers. So my question is that, so also, and I would like to ask you in Airbus, in the Ms. and the Natalie Elrat, and in technological, in terms of technology. So, and nowadays you really know well, and artificial intelligence and machine learning, all kinds of cover and every comprehensively some conventional warfare in the technology. So is there some real strong strategy or your enforcement and to connect in the AI and machine learning in space area? So because in Korea, and we really benchmarked in the United States, they already in the AI strategy in DoD. So the strongly and the demand and required from the military services to connect and use every area and then the artificial area. So, but is there some good and way of your behaving when doing R&D in using the kind of informational technology? Maybe that's my 2 first questions.
Thank you very much. I will ask each of the panelists to answer briefly how they can, all the questions that were asked and the way they want to answer. Mrs. Erard, maybe you want to start?
Yes, well, can you hear me? Yes. On machine learning, artificial intelligence, yes, of course, each company has its own programs, and at EU level there is the program on critical key technologies, which is ongoing. So I think you will see more news in the coming months because it is ongoing. I would argue that probably Europe is not leading on this topic. There's much more effort on the quantum technology at that stage. So difficult to compare, but I think there's probably a lack of investment here. But I hope that by focusing on the key critical technology, the observatory will underline the fact that we need to invest more.
Thank you, Mr. Alexi.
Thank you. Just maybe a word on the legal aspect on cyber. It's true that for the time being the situation is not clear, but it's quite normal because this is a new domain. So when we have such a new domain, we have only 2 options. The first option, we try to develop a new text, well, with a risk that background is limited. So risk is putting something that we will be obliged to modify in the next 2 or 3 years, or we just wait and we just rely on jurisprudence of a court. Personally, I would probably prefer the second option, not taking risk, putting this on the text, because as a lawyer, I would say that sometimes when the law is not totally clear, law is good.
Thank you for this conclusion. Mr. Patrick Chattermoulin.
I mean, just to reply on the international law aspects, just also to recall that space is a parallel competence, which means that what we do at international level, member states are free to do as well, and we complement each other. So we are very active in the open-ended working group. We believe strongly in the European Union and collectively that the behavioral approach is the right one. We are not too much in favor of the ban on the placement of the PPWT, the placement of weapons in our space. I think we cannot control that because it's very difficult to understand what is a weapon at the end of the day. So behavioral approach, and as I said, our thought, and it's just kind of work in progress, but that the strategy itself will be a diplomatic tool, will be an example shown to the face of the world, and we need to apply ourselves our own behavior. So we cannot say chapter 1 we retaliate in space, and chapter 4 we don't want to retaliation. I mean, that doesn't work like that. So it's also one of the exercises we'll have to reconcile with our two brains, I would say, defense and foreign dimensions, as we kind of keep a consistent message throughout the strategy, and also possibly through clear action like the US did, showing example. But that's something we need to discuss with our member states. And then on the exercises, because I could not resist, we are our own exercise as well in your previous team, and thanks to the Asterix exercise of the French, we could piggyback on the French Asterix, and we do have our own exercises to test our response to incidents related to the space infrastructure. There is an ambiguity, though, around the notion of exercises in the EU, because sometimes we do it to test procedures, and it's very yes or no, but we use it very much also as war games, to think and reflect, what if? I know that the French presidency, for instance, will organize a workshop on space in 42/7 with a kind of exercise like that. What if, you have a chain reaction that leads to a problem, a crash of airplanes or whatever? What do we do? And so on. So we also do a lot of exercises to stimulate our thinking and what type of reaction through concrete cases. Otherwise, space tends to be a bit abstract.
So a quick answer. Space law, I agree with what was said. We don't want the space law to be now, the thing to be reopened, because we think it's going to be a nightmare to have a new space law, space treaty. So we very much prefer to have this work being done about the norms of good, responsible behaviors. This is very pragmatic, and this is probably not satisfying, but this is the first step, very significant. The early warning, I would say that the answer is in your question. So it's probably a mix of both, geostationary, because we have done some works in the past and we have to capitalize on this, and probably we have to look what could different architectures could bring to an early warning capability. This is not. This was not in the plans, apart from the studies, technological and concept studies. But I think that the emergence of the hypersonic missiles threat, I would say, is something that we have to consider to put on the table again this question for them during the weeks and months to come. You mentioned the European doctrine, but actually what is being done since April is it's not a doctrine, it's a strategy. It's a space defense, European space defense strategy, which is being done by a working group under the lead of the External Action Service and the European Commission. And so this is doctrine is below the strategy, in the doctrine. So doctrine is much more practical, and of course, and we have to be pragmatic, because in the European Union, nobody has the same level of knowledge of space capabilities. So putting together step by step, edition after edition, people around the table in these exercises is the best way to build something from bottom, from zero, I would say. And to answer your question, AI and space, this is something very important to us in the Space Command. We consider that the backbone of our future space capabilities, which we consider as a holistic, overall, and global system, actually, where all the platform sensors and the ground sensors and partners and commercial partners and international partners would be connected, is the capability of collecting huge amounts of data and to process them, and to do so we need HPCs and AI, definitely, and this is the reason why we bought very recently to Atos 2 HPCs, latest generation, for the Space Command, and one being our digital sandbox to experiment development of algorithm with startups and all players that want to do that, and the other one being the first break of our future space C4.
Thank you very much. So thank you for assisting to this conference. Thank you all the panelists for responding to the invitation of SYNOPIA and Confrontation Europe. And have a great day in the Salon Eurosatory. Thank you.